and this is the account of the creation of the heavens and the earth. When Matt asked me to read the whole thing, I was like, it's going to be a while. So thank you for listening, and now hopefully we'll be able to have a good discussion about all of that, because there's some good stuff in there. So, welcome.
Hi.
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 Is this thing on?
Are we on?
So.
Can you hear?
Hello?
Yes, there it is. Is that right? Cool.
Yeah.
I don't think that one is.
Oh.
That's the way it should be, Tim.
These two have already said they're hoping to fall out, so...
We picked two very grey people, that's the problem. We're just like, yeah, whatever. But
Oh, I definitely can't read that. I'm going to.
But before we go into the questions, by way of just starting, I don't know what I'm talking about. So if I come across as saying this is what I think, it might be what I think right now. But the Genesis stuff is really challenging, and there are people who are like fluent in ancient Hebrew who can argue about the different meanings of different things. And so be gracious, be merciful, and know that sometimes I might say what I think, and it might be utter rubbish, and you can walk out and go, that was rubbish, but that's okay.
Obviously, I do know what I'm talking about, but no, I don't speak any Hebrew. Obviously, I don't speak any Hebrew.
Amazing. Well, we've already got some questions coming in. I guess we could start with one of those, or should we start with a poll? What do we think? We'll start with a poll. Okay, is it live? There we go. On a scale of 1 to 5, how much of an eco-warrior are you? Solid 3 coming through strong to start with. Ooh. What about you two? Where do you think you fall on this?
I think Tim should introduce what he does for a job first.
So I'm an environmental economist. So my job is to make sense of why the environment is important and why we should take it into account in our decision making. And I do that for a little bit of government called Natural England.
So not at all a bit of an eco-warrior then?
I'm probably in the middle on that, I think, as in we try to do some things for the environment in terms of what we eat and how we travel and stuff, but we are not gluing ourselves to the M25 this week. So
this is one of those things, isn't it, where you might think you might think that you're an eco-warrior, or you might think that you've got excellent standards in an area, and then someone just goes, and you realise actually that there's so much more that you could do. And I certainly fit in that, where I think actually I've made some changes, but then there's a lot more that could be done.
Yeah, I think I agree. We all try and do our best, don't we? But then it's hard.
Yeah, can I say something about the framing of that, because that's really important, because there are things that we can do and we should do in terms of taking personal responsibility. But there was a moment, 10 years, 15 years ago, where the government framed the whole climate thing as a personal responsibility issue, almost like dieting or something. And it can't be addressed that way because it's systemic. So there's so much of when you turn on the electricity in your house, how that gets produced, that's a systemic decision. That's not something you can change personally. And even decisions like whether you drive or cycle, some cities are safe and pleasant to cycle around, some are dangerous. It's not just a personal decision. There's a personal decision, but there's a huge amount that's systemic. So if we try to take responsibility for it all, and I've tried, personally, then it actually leads to huge pressure, and you kind of can't deal with it that way. So I think there's something about accepting that there's some personal responsibility, but there's quite a lot that's corporate that we need to work on as groups or as a country, rather than something we can just do as a lifestyle decision.
Great. So we've got our discussion questions that we had that Matt has sent us to have a bit of a chat about this evening. I think the first one is probably a good place to start, and that is, how are you supposed to read the opening chapters of Genesis? So that big long passage of the Bible that I started us with, how should we read Genesis 1?
I think any part of the Bible that we read, I think that the sort of the fundamental question that I think we should ask or try and ask is what was the purpose of the text? What is the writer? What is the point they're making? What is God saying through them at that time, at that point in time, and trying to drill down into what that is. And I think to let ourselves off the hook a little bit, if you were to speak to someone in ancient English 1,000 years ago, you probably wouldn't understand a whole lot of what they say, and all their references to the world around them would be lost. And then we're looking at something that was written, potentially 4,000 years ago in a different language that doesn't really, although there's Hebrew spoken now, it's very different to the ancient Hebrew it was written in, and it's, there's a huge shift through all of that. And so I think that what we should first do is be gentle, and hold things loosely. And actually, we'll read it first time, and we'll come to a conclusion. We'll read it again, and we'll have a different conclusion. We'll read it a third time, and then we'll have an opposing view. And I think so a lot of people have found the creation story a real sticking point for their Christian faith, I think, and I was one of those. And I was never somebody who could buy into what we would call the literal reading of the 7-day creation. It's just something I've just never been able to fit inside my head growing up. I've just gone, that just cannot be. Parked it, carry on with my Christian faith. I believe in Jesus, I follow God. I don't understand what this is all about. Park it, move on, come back later. And I think I've done that, particularly with the creation story, a number of times over the years. And I probably haven't read it. This email went out not all that long ago, and it wasn't mentioned about the whole climate change business, but I probably haven't read the creation story for a couple of years now, 3-4 years maybe. Actually sat down and read Genesis 1 and 2. They're not that much fun to read, and I think if you don't understand it, that makes it quite hard. And I think what we have to do as well is just to try and understand that actually what we think, it's not a science book. If you want to know the science of creation, don't read Genesis. That's not the right place to start. That's not what they were doing. They're talking about water below, water above, creating this sphere in the middle. And, we understand that isn't our understanding of the construction of the earth today. But that wasn't the point. Like, they put Genesis 1, and if you read Genesis 2, it's different. They've got different accounts. And so actually, if it was meant to be a scientific telling of the actions, they wouldn't have put them next to each other. And Ezekiel draws on Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 later on, and they're opposing accounts right next to each other, and he's fine with it. And that's because I think the purpose of Genesis wasn't to say it happened in this order. It wasn't a scientific explanation, and so I don't think we should read it like that. I think we have to try and think, what actually was the author trying to say? What were they telling us at that time? And then to try and see what God has for us through that. What do you think the author was trying to tell us through Genesis, Tim?
Yeah, okay. So I think one very interesting thing to do, so to see it in its context is one interesting thing to do. I'm really open to people believing different things about this. My wife and I believe different things about this, but in my mind, it can't have been science because we hadn't invented science yet. Science only got invented about 300 years ago, so it can't have been trying to do science. I think what it was trying to do is give us a basic framework and understanding about our relationship with God and the world. And so there's two interesting comparisons. So Dave Roderick over there did a talk in January about comparing it with other stories that were going around at the time about the creation of the world, which almost always involve a big fight between gods and the world being made up out of leftover body parts. Normally, and people then serving the gods. So in those stories, the violence is endemic. It's built in. The violence is baked in. In the Genesis story, the violence comes about because of people, and the world was made peaceful. So that's one. I think to compare that is really interesting. But the other thing I think we can do is to compare it to our worldview, the dominant worldview in the West, and say, how is this different? And actually, it's really, really different if we look carefully enough. So we treat the environment largely as stuff for us to use. We call it resources. So just like it's a big warehouse or something. In the biblical text, God makes it and says it's good. So it's got its own value, right? And God says it's good even before he made people. So people have a special role in the creation story, but nowhere does it say this was all made for people. Sometimes we can assume that because that's so deep in our culture that we can push that back onto the text. But the text doesn't say that. It gives the environment its own value. And so I think we can challenge our own worldview by looking at the values in the creation story.
I think one of the questions that came through kind of leads into that, and it's the one that just says, is Genesis 1 primarily about creation or about God? I think that kind of ties into what you were saying there. It's a bit of a...
I think it's about humanity as well, isn't it? And actually about what's our value. Are we of any value? And actually the stories at the time would say, no, you are of no value. You are of dirt and dust and rubbish. Whereas actually the story of our God says, no, you are of value. God wants to walk with us. He wants to, he wants to walk with us through the Garden of Eden. He wants to have a relationship with us. He wants to, he said, we are good. And that's the starting point, I think. And I think it says a lot about who we are as well as creation. And me saying that Genesis isn't a science book doesn't mean the thoughts on whole Adam and Eve and stuff. That's a different question, and that doesn't mean that that's excluded or anything like that, or that. So don't don't mistake that.
Right. So I think there's two ways that can go wrong. Okay, so this whole debate that we have in the church between how literally you read Genesis. To some extent, I'm not that bothered. Actually, if we get the right understandings about us and God and how we relate to creation, we're talking about something that was a very long time ago and no one really understands. It can go wrong in two ways in my mind. One is if we make it a barrier to people coming into the faith. So if people say, you need to believe this to be a Christian, then we create a sort of hurdle, which I think is unnecessary. Or the other thing is if it takes us into an anti-science place, which it does for some people, which is a dangerous place to be. But those are the two things that I worry about. Other than that, I'm not sure how much it matters.
There are some incredible questions coming in, and I'm panicking slightly because we are not going to have time to get through them all. So apologies if we don't. But we've got another poll up at the moment, which is, what is something you've seen which makes you admire God's creation? And there are the Serengeti, giraffes. I mean, yeah. Sunrise and sunset would definitely have been my answer, so I'm glad that's come up. The sea in a storm. I saw the Grand Canyon was up there as well. We've had some good travellers.
I wonder who put that up.
Dave Roderick. Nancy. Now this is just everyone being nice to their family members. How dolphins name themselves? Who wrote that? I'm intrigued. Oh, we've lost them. From the crowd. Oh, there are so many juicy questions. So many. Should we go with that one? Matt's helping me. I'm trying to read them quickly. What are some of the top things we can actually do that contribute to measurable change? Tim?
In terms of climate change or in terms of the environment or... Okay. Okay, so it comes down to the easiest things you can do, I suppose, in terms of personal responsibility or lobbying for change are the heating systems. So the way we heat our houses, that's a big source of carbon, very difficult to fix in some cases, easier in others. What we consume, particularly in terms of meat and dairy. There's a great fact that came out of a report that I was involved in, which is we'd need about half as much land globally, farmland, if we all let like people do in India. So if we all adopted something like an Indian diet, which doesn't have to be vegetarian, just has to be mostly plant-based, we'd need half as much farmland worldwide. So if we could plant the rest up with forests and bogs and stuff, that would make a huge difference. So there's a lot there. And then transport is the other one. Transport is huge in terms of our energy use. But we need system change as well as personal responsibility to do those things and in some other areas as well.
Anything to add, Pete?
I was going to say buy less stuff. I think that's something that we can look around and look for fancy stuff, but actually, if we all buy more stuff than whole other areas of the globe, and we're addicted to it, and if we could do that a bit less, that'd be good. Walk more.
Yeah, great. Humans are made in the image of God. What does this actually mean? What makes us different from other animals, if anything? From Matt Bryden official, everyone's favourite Slido hashtag handle.
That's a really good question. Could you? I haven't got my phone. Could you read the little bit at the end of Genesis 1 that says, "In the image of God they were made and made"? Apparently, this is the first bit of poetry in the Bible, and I think while Abbie's looking for it, and in this poem there are different. The Hebrew bit is used in 3 different things. It's like I can't remember the order. Do you want to read it? Abbie,
which bit did you want?
I think it was verse 26. They were made in the image of God.
This bit.
Yeah, those 3 lines.
So God created human beings in his own image. In the image of God he created them, male and female he created them.
So the Hebrew at the end of those 3 words, I'm not a Hebrew scholar, so I said I don't know what I'm talking about. But they talk about in terms of, there's a specific thing, and it's important about referring to mankind, an individual man, and then, and again, sort of mankind again. And I think when I get really excited about the image of God being through all mankind, and actually, yes, there's a bit of us we have the image of God, but actually when we really show the image of God is when we're all together, humankind, its diversity, it's the way that each of us view God is slightly different. And if we put that all together, then we're much more likely to see God in who he is, in how I see the world, which might be slightly abstract. But I think how we view God and God's images in us is important as a collective. And actually, as an individual, it's got meaning and it's special. But actually, when we come together and when we're diverse, that's when we can really see a little bit more about what God looks like. And I think that probably shows itself in the various interactions we might have with different people, or how different people express love, or how they express, how different people hear God, how different people react to God, how different people want to worship God. That tells us a lot more about the image of God than we may have within ourselves. It probably doesn't answer your question, Matt, but that's my rant around it. For the proper answer, we'll go to Tim.
So there's something about humanity's search for meaning and relationship, which I don't think animals have to the same degree. There's something about humanity's ability to be creative and destructive, which is on a completely different scale from any of the animals. And in terms of the environment, there is this idea that we should be looking after, stewarding, caring for the world, which means actually representing God into the world. There's that kind of ruling the world with God or on God's behalf, which comes out of the Genesis thing and is also part of the final vision at the end of Revelation.
Okay, and I think one more question is, as Christians, should our response to the climate crisis differ from those who don't know Jesus? And the question that we discussed before coming here was, how do we talk to non-Christians about creation in a world where the science is king, in theory? How do we discuss creation and the climate?
So discuss creation as in how it was made, or as in creation as in? I mean, I think I wouldn't necessarily see this as a Christian and I don't think a faith in God necessarily has a defining factor in how you view the environment. I think I've been challenged possibly more by people who don't follow God about the environment than people who do. I think our role as people who believe in God is that, again, that God has created it. It's good. It's not for our consumption, our use, and our destruction. It's for us to look after it. It's for us to share it. It's for us to walk with God through it. And so I think we have a different view of it. I would love to say that Christians are leading climate change, but we're not. As a group. Sorry, that might not be right.
No, I think you're dead right. It's dead right, and that's interesting. So I've got a several bit answer here. Is that okay?
Go for it.
So one thing is, however you look at it, if you see creation as made deliberately in a kind of non-evolutionary way, or if you see creation as as having evolved over millions and millions of years, it deserves enormous care and respect. It doesn't matter which way you look at that. So we don't really need to, this shouldn't take us into a science or pro or anti-science space. We should just be saying, look at the world, isn't it fantastic? We believe that God was involved, made this, that this world reflects God. And that should be in itself really powerful. So it's unfortunate, you see, that the word creation has got associated in the secular mind with a particular perspective on science. And so therefore you say creation, now you're into a debate about science. Well, actually, I'd rather talk about, isn't the world fantastic and doesn't it need looking after? And because there we've got huge amounts in common with people who aren't believers, that we can build on. I suppose the other thing is, as Christians, we should have an advantage in this looking after the environment and climate change business, because we should be seeking another kingdom from the kingdom that the world is seeking. And the kingdom that the world is seeking is still about conspicuous consumption. How successful can you be? How young can you look? How fit? How far can you travel? How much money can you make? This is the stuff of the kingdom the world is seeking, is all that stuff. And it's getting pumped at us every day through our phones and TVs and all the rest of it. Now, we believe in a kingdom that is more exciting than that. And therefore, we should find it easier to step away from the kingdom that the world is pushing. I'm not sure we always manage to cash that in the way that we should. But that's an agenda to work on. I think if we did, then maybe Christians would start to take the lead in this environmental climate change agenda in a way that we haven't been. And it is interesting to note that Christians have been at the forefront of justice for poor people in the UK historically and globally, but we haven't been at the forefront of the environmental movement. So if you look at the big charities that do third world justice, there's Oxfam, which is secular, and just about all the rest of them are Christian or have Christian origins. So that sphere is very heavily influenced by Christians. Not so with environmental charities and the environmental world. So the way that we've interpreted our faith has made it easier for us to be activists and campaigning on social justice than it has on the environment. I don't think, by the way, there's a choice between the two. I think you can't do one without doing the other. But it seems entirely consistent with the faith to interpret it in a way which is as passionate about the environment, even though that isn't where we've been historically, I think.
Can I very quickly pick up on a question that says, didn't God invent science? And I think, so the question is, didn't God invent science? Sorry, just to completely ignore the order. I think is brilliant. And if you imagine, like, the way I think about the sort of the science of the cosmology, if you like, and, dark energy and stuff like that kind of is there, but we don't know what it is like if you're a teacher and you set your students a problem, a maths problem, I don't know, you set a year 3 group an algebraic thing, and they don't even know what algebra is, but through the step they go, oh, maybe it is a maths thing, and then they get a little bit further, oh, maybe it's this, maybe it's that, and they journey through, and actually watching them discover the sort of the next steps of the puzzle. And I think, if you set your children, when you see them solving a problem or working through it, that actually it's quite an exciting thing to watch them progress on the next step. And I think so much of the human journey in terms of exploring science and physics and biology and all those things is actually, phenomenally exciting for us. I think God also finds it brilliant that we make these journeys and look into it. And I don't think God's afraid about what we, how we view various bits of science in that moment in time when we see it. But I think that's quite an exciting adventure.
I've got to come in on that one. So there's two things which are really important for us to get hold of. One is that there was lots of clever thinking beforehand, but science only really happened once. And it happened about 300 years ago, and it happened in Europe. And there's a really serious argument that science could only have emerged in a Judeo-Christian worldview, because the Judeo-Christian worldview thought the world was consistent and reliable and therefore could be discovered and known through experiments. And most other worldviews assumed the world was chaotic and under the control of various capricious beings. And if you believe that, you wouldn't do science. So we should see science as coming out of and being consistent with our faith. It's not a threat. And the other thing is that science got spun very heavily by people who had an anti-faith agenda. So there were some tensions between bits of the faith and bits of emerging science. But that story's been massively overtold, overspun, really. Huge parts of the church were very comfortable with science, contributed to science, and accepted emerging facts as they came about. So someone did a study of the people who made the most breakthroughs in science as to whether they had a nominal faith, believed in a God they could pray to, or were hardcore atheists. And the people who made the biggest breakthroughs in science were more likely to have a faith than the general population at the time. And they were more likely to believe in a God they could pray to than the general population at the time. So there's no correlation between scientific contribution and atheism, despite the fact it's often sold that way. So just don't buy that one. It's not true.
Amazing. Thank you both so much for just starting to scratch the surface on all of these amazing questions and big discussions that we're having. Don't run away just yet. I'm going to ask if we can pray in a second, because there's a lot. We've discussed a lot. There are lots of big ideas that we've spoken about, and I think that'd just be a really good way to wrap this up before we go into some worship. Worship is going to be finishing at around 2:45, so a little bit later than we usually finish. If you've got plans you need to rush off for, don't feel bad about having to go, but we just wanted to give the time and the space to what we've got going on. So yeah, if one or both of you could just pray for us, and then we're going to move into a time of worship if the band want to start preparing themselves.
Yeah, Father God, we just thank you that you are awesome, that you are above everything that we understand, that you are the creator of our universe. And Lord, there are mysteries that we haven't even known that there's a mystery there yet. We haven't scratched the surface in our understanding. But you hold it all. And you have got us. And although you are the God that flung stars all over the place, that you care about us. And you're bothered about our reality. And you care about this world. And that you're a God of hope. That you're a God of regeneration. Lord, and I thank you that you love us. I thank you that you want to walk with us, that you want us to experience your goodness. Yeah, Father, I just pray that where we have blind spots, where we have bits of the Bible we can't understand or we don't agree with or whatever, that we won't just turn and run, but we would bring that to you and own that and hold it up to you. And that through dialogue with others, through gentleness of our friends, that we may come to learn more of you and what you might speak to us through those passages, Lord. Yeah, in Jesus' name, Lord, amen.
Yeah, Father, I just pray. It's so easy to get overwhelmed, judgmental, legalistic, guilty in the face of climate change. It's just such a big deal to take on. And yeah, I just pray that you would give us hope, and that that we would just follow you and be open to where you're taking us, and that the fact that we know that you made creation and that you have a plan for creation would give us the hope to walk with you step by step, and not shut down about this issue due to overwhelm. Amen.